FS Farmer comes back with this question about the gear ratio, saying they're using first for charging, otherwise they would still be in second. Did you not
Well,
watch Max yesterday? Yeah, I was watching Max yesterday, but that wasn't clear. I think with respect, FS Farmer, I think you're drawing a conclusion there with insufficient information, but you may well be right. I'm not prepared. I wouldn't say you're wrong, but very early days to do that. But I don't know your thoughts on that, Mark. Would you do that? Would you go down to first for charging?
um, I, it it will be beneficial to use a shorter gear in any corner. So if you can use fourth instead of fifth, or third instead of fourth, or maybe some very slow corners, if you can use first instead of second, then it should help uh, the regen. The trouble is, obviously, if you use first gear, and you get it makes the engine performance very sharp. And if you have too much effective braking from the engine and the regen that you're trying to do, it'll just break traction. It'll cause the rear wheels to under rotate. So it'll come down to what the driver can manage in terms of drivability and response from the car.
Mm-hmm.
So a driver who is able to use a shorter gear or use a short gear earlier is probably going to get some benefit, and Max may well be one of the people who's able to do that. But it in some ways it comes down to the amount of torque that the engine manufacturer or teams run at. So unfortunately, with all these things, it's a bit like when you talk about brake balance. Brake balance in itself isn't a meaningful thing anymore, because brake balance means a percentage of front and rear wheel braking from the brake discs and brake pads that you set. But because we're doing electrical regeneration from the rear axle, there's an amount of engine braking that is part of that brake balance. So you have to talk about axle torque balance rather than brake balance, but the terminology is brake balance. So ratios in a similar way are somewhat irrelevant, because the teams can manipulate the amount
Yeah.
of torque that is the negative torque they have in different gear ratios to some extent. So it's not the ratio that matters; it's the amount of regen that is being done, or the amount of engine braking that you get in particular revs that matters. But the fact is that if the engine's turning over more quickly, then you should be getting more regen. So using shorter gears, if the driver can manage it, will be beneficial. But it all comes down to ultimately the amount of rear axle braking that the driver can accommodate,
Yeah.
and then can he pick the throttle up in a shorter gear without breaking traction? That's going to be a driving limitation, shall we say, and a driver who can manage his throttle more gently to pick that up should get a benefit if he can do that. It's very technique. It's very
Yeah.
complicated.
And
Oh,
whatever it is, of course, Max will do it quite well. There's no doubt about that. But my point about coming out of turn 10 in first or second is related to how slowly they're now going through turn 9, which is, for
yeah,
me, a real eye opener as to how slow these cars are compared with
yeah,
2025, because they're braking before they go into 9 now, which means they're
yeah,
going much slower into
yeah,
10, which means that probably they're going to, that's why so many guys are using first gear for 10 now today.
yeah,
And so there's that. But my other
yeah,
point, Mark, is if in theory, if you want to save fuel for the ice, you want to change gears sooner and you want to keep the revs down. How important is it to be saving fuel
uh,
relative to all this harvesting business?
from from my basic understanding, I don't think that is a huge factor. Where am I trying to go with this?
Because it's
I
70 litres now, isn't it?
Well, it's, dare I say it, it's even more complicated than that.
Oh no.
The technically, so in description, the fuel metering is now done by energy, not by volumetric flow.
Yeah.
So um, so the meter, it does measure the flow. It converts that into a mass, or it converts that into a velocity, which converts that into a mass flow. And then because the fuel suppliers have to give the FIA basically an energy density, the FIA regulates the energy flow. So in actual fact, two different fuels could flow at different volume flow as long as they don't exceed the energy flow which is regulated. So a less energy dense fuel is allowed to flow faster. So as I say, it's being done by energy flow rather than volumetric flow now. It's just more complication. The energy flow has been effectively reduced by 30%, which was something I hadn't fully appreciated previously. So the cars will start with significantly less fuel on board than they started in the past, and can use less fuel during a lap. But precisely how much is difficult to say, other than it's nominally around 30%, but it's not as simple as that. But that is a large contribution to how much lighter the cars will be at the race start.
Well, yeah, I was going to get onto that. I mean, and what horsepower are they going to be getting off the line then from the ice?
Well, in simple terms, the cars will be producing about, and I'm going to talk in horsepower, somewhere around 500 to 550 horsepower from the ice. And then the total is around about 1,000 horsepower. So the other comes from the electrical power.
Right.
But bear in mind that I said that when the cars start from zero, they're not allowed to introduce electrical power until they've got to, I think it's about 50 kph. So initially, they've got a peak power of around 550 horsepower available, but then the engine won't be able to produce that instantaneously anyway, so they won't have that much power sort of right from the get-go.
But a much lighter car than last year, obviously, with the lighter fuel.
The car is about 30 kilos lighter inherently than it was last year. A large proportion of which is simply from lighter wheels and tyres, it has to be said. And that is actually, I believe, one of the main reasons why the wheels and tyres are smaller, is they needed to find weight.
Oh, really?
The rest of the weight saving comes from the loss of the MGUH and just whatever the teams can achieve. Well, the shorter wheelbase means that the cars will inherently be lighter. So I think that's the main area where the weight saving is coming from. And then for the race start, as I say, there's another effectively around about 30 kilos saving in fuel load. So roughly 60 kilos lighter at the start of a race compared to last year, which is of some significance, but it's not quite 10%. Whereas in qualifying, the weight saving is more just the car weight saving, which is about 30 kilos.